I think I didn't do anything wrong, just said what everyone was already thinking at dinner. Then a courier handed me papers while my mother poured tea, and I learned my husband was done playing the fool. He didn't yell, he filed. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I didn't think I did anything wrong. I only said what I felt, that I was tired of being ignored, of always being the one waiting. Tom acted like he was patient, but patience is just a quiet way to control someone. He never shouted, never slammed doors, never forgot the bills. He just lived like life was a list. I wanted to feel something again, something alive. That's all. Our apartment looked warm to others. Yellow curtains, Leo's little shoes by the door, dinner ready by 7, but it felt like a hotel. Tom came home smelling of chalk dust and cafeteria air. He'd ask about my day, and I'd tell him I was fine. I said it like I was bored. He'd kiss my hair and check Leo's homework. I watched his back while he read bedtime stories and thought, this is all he has to give. At work, everything felt different. I was the assistant property manager at Riverside Oaks, a dull complex with beige walls and cracked parking lines. Tenants complained about noise, leaks, mold, but I liked being the one who fixed problems, even if I only made calls. That was where I met Nate. Nate Corcoran was one of the maintenance techs, always covered in paint dust and carrying a clipboard like it was armor. He made jokes that were stupid but warm. He asked once why I looked tired, and I said I hadn't slept much because of paperwork. He said I looked like someone who never rested, like I had something heavy in my head. I laughed. Nobody ever noticed that before. Tom never noticed anything. Cara, my friend at the front desk, teased that Nate was my hallway crush. I didn't correct her. It wasn't like that, not really. But I started wearing perfume again, small things Tom wouldn't care about. I started staying later to finish reports. Tom didn't ask where I was. He trusted me. That was part of the problem. He trusted too much, like he was blind. One Friday, I came home late. Leo was asleep, and Tom was folding laundry. He looked up and asked why I hadn't called. I said my phone had died. He nodded, slow, like he didn't believe it. Then he said he'd made pasta and left some in the pot. I didn't eat it. I went straight to bed, saying I was exhausted. He tried to hold me that night. I pushed his hand away and said I was too hot. He turned over without a sound. In the dark, I whispered to myself that he was making me into someone cold. The next morning, I met Cara for coffee. She told me Tom seemed depressed. I said he was just quiet. She said quiet men usually hide something. I laughed and said I doubted that. He was too plain for secrets. Still, the idea stuck in my mind. Maybe he wasn't the saint everyone thought. Maybe his calm was fake. It was easy to believe when I wanted a reason to drift. At work, Nate stopped by my cubicle again. He said the leak in Unit 312 was fixed and asked if I'd checked the invoice. I said I trusted him. He smiled and said, "That's rare." I said, "Maybe I'm just easy to trust." It was flirting, but soft, like walking near a cliff and pretending not to see the edge. By the end of that week, Tom tried again. He asked if we could plan a date night. I told him I had a staff meeting. He looked at me with that steady teacher face, the one that never changed even when students lied to him. He said, "You used to like movie nights." I said, "I used to like a lot of things." He didn't ask what that meant. Later that night, I saw him writing in a small notebook at the kitchen table. When I asked what it was, he said it was just a budget plan. I laughed and told him he was predictable. He said, "Someone has to be." I started talking about him differently to my parents. I told my mother, Miriam, that Tom didn't make me feel special anymore. She said, "He's a good man, but maybe not passionate." My father, Raoul, said, "At least he's stable." My mother rolled her eyes and said stability was boring. I agreed with her. It felt nice to have someone on my side. When Denise, Tom's mother, called, she asked if everything was all right. I said we were just busy. She said Tom sounded tired on the phone and asked if I was helping him rest. I said I worked full-time too, and it wasn't my job to manage his feelings. She went quiet. I told myself she was judging me, and I didn't like being judged. Jonah, Tom's younger brother, dropped by once to deliver a toy for Leo. He asked me how things were. I said fine. Then he said something strange, that Tom was asking questions about our joint account. I smiled and said he was just being careful. Jonah nodded slowly, as if he knew more than he said. At work, I started saving Nate's number under vendor AC. He sent memes, small jokes, nothing serious. But every time my phone buzzed, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years. One night he texted, "You deserve to smile more." I stared at it for too long before deleting it. Still, the words stayed like heat under my skin. Tom began coming home later, saying he was tutoring students after class. I told Kara he was probably lying, though I had no proof. It just felt good to flip the story, to make him the suspicious one. She agreed easily, saying men always have secrets too. At dinner one night, Tom asked why I laughed so much at my phone. I said I was messaging Kara about work stress. He said he was glad I had friends. I told him he didn't need to sound jealous. He said he wasn't. I called him passive. He looked down at his plate and said he was just tired. That weekend, I opened the drawer under the sink to grab batteries and saw the notebook again. It was neat, divided with colored tabs. Budget, schedule, and notes. I flipped through it expecting numbers, but each page was blank. Only the tabs had been labeled. It looked like a plan waiting to begin. I laughed and told myself he was making another boring list, but a small part of me felt watched, not by him, but by my own words echoing back. I put the notebook down and shut the drawer. He called from the living room, asking if I wanted tea. I said I was fine. That night, as Leo slept between us after a nightmare, Tom turned and looked at me in the dim light. He said softly that he missed me. I said I was right there. He nodded but didn't answer. His hand rested near Leo's shoulder, not mine. I stared at the ceiling and thought how strange it was to live beside someone who never shouted, never begged, never broke. A man like that could survive anything, even me. I closed my eyes, thinking maybe that was the problem. Maybe he was too calm to love properly. And just before I fell asleep, I remembered the empty notebook and wondered when he would start writing in it. The night of the dinner started like a show I was ready to star in. It was Kara's birthday, and she insisted on celebrating at Basil and Brick, the trendy bistro downtown with hanging bulbs and brick walls, pretending to be rustic. I told Tom to dress nice, not too nice, just enough not to embarrass me. He wore his grey shirt, the one I hated because it made him look like an accountant. I wore a red dress that I knew drew eyes. I told him he should be lucky to be seen with me. He said I always looked good, which somehow made me angry. The table was long, full of noise. Kara sat at the center, laughing at every comment Nate made. He was there too. By coincidence, I'd said earlier, though I'd mentioned the dinner to him days before. Tom sat across from me, quiet as usual, his hands folded near his drink. I told myself I'd shake him up tonight, remind him that I wasn't invisible. The waiter came for orders. Tom asked for water first, of course. Nate ordered beer and winked at me. I smiled back, a small secret in a crowded room. Kara caught it and raised her eyebrows. Later, she leaned in and whispered that Tom looked bored again. I said that was his natural state. The talk moved from work to relationships. Kara joked about how hard it was to find men who listen. I said I had the opposite problem, a man who listens but never does anything. Everyone laughed. Tom smiled politely. It wasn't enough. I wanted him to react, to care. Then the moment happened, the one that keeps replaying in my head now. Nate made a comment about couples losing chemistry after marriage. Kara nudged me and said I should answer that. I looked straight at Tom and said, Maybe your friend can coach you how to satisfy me. The table went silent. Even the music seemed to drop. Someone dropped a fork. Nate froze mid-smile. Tom just stared at me, eyes steady but blank. I tried to laugh it off, said it was a joke. Kara forced a chuckle. Miriam giggled too loudly, trying to cover the awkwardness. Raoul stared into his water glass. Denise, sitting near the end, put down her napkin and whispered something to Jonah, who stood up and went to the restroom. Tom didn't say anything for a full minute. Then he said, "Can we talk later?" His voice was low, calm, nothing like the reaction I expected. I shrugged and said there was nothing to talk about. "You take everything too seriously," I added, turning back to Kara. The waiter came back and asked if everything was fine. I smiled and said yes, perfect. Tom nodded. The food arrived, untouched mostly. I drank more wine than I planned. When Kara tried to change the subject, it was too late. The energy had already changed. During dessert, Denise leaned close and said she was going to head out early. She said quietly, "That was unkind, Olala." I told her I was only teasing. She said there's a difference between teasing and cruelty. I didn't respond. She left without finishing her coffee. Tom asked for the check. The waiter handed it to him. He didn't look at me, just signed the receipt. When I said he could have let someone else pay since it wasn't our party, he said softly, "I wanted to make sure no one owed me anything tonight." I didn't understand then. Outside, the air was cold. Tom called a rideshare instead of driving. In the car, I told him he was being dramatic. He said he didn't want to argue. I said he never wanted to argue, that he just shut down whenever things got real. He said, "I understand what you need now." I took that as sarcasm, but he didn't sound angry, just done. When we got home, Leo was asleep at Denise's place. I took off my heels and threw them near the couch. Tom poured himself a glass of water and asked if I wanted one. I said no. Then I said he should lighten up. Everyone jokes about stuff like that. He said, "Maybe not everyone." I told him I was sorry if it embarrassed him, but he shouldn't make such a big deal out of one sentence. He said, "It wasn't one sentence, it was a summary." I rolled my eyes and went to the bedroom. The next morning, he acted normal. Made toast, packed Leo's lunch, kissed him on the head. He didn't look at me much, though. I said we should forget last night. He said he already had. That stung more than an argument would have. At work, Kara replayed the story like gossip candy. She said half the table thought Tom would explode. I said he wouldn't dare. She laughed and said Nate couldn't stop thinking about it. When Nate came by later, he said it was wild that I said that out loud. I told him someone had to. He said he hoped Tom wasn't mad at him. I said Tom wasn't worth the effort. But even saying it, something twisted inside me. That afternoon, Denise texted to ask if Leo could stay over again for the weekend. I told her yes. She replied, "It might give you both space to think." I didn't want space. I wanted to feel in control. I texted Nate instead, told him Tom was sulking. Nate said maybe I should ease up. I said I didn't need advice. When I got home that evening, Tom was at the printer. The light kept moving across documents, steady, slow, greenish-white. I asked what he was printing. He said, "Just copies for school." I went to get a drink, but I noticed one of the pages sliding out had our names on it. It was our marriage certificate. He picked it up before I could say anything and stacked it neatly. He told me Leo was asleep early. I said good. I tried to joke, asked if he was printing evidence for some crime. He said no, just history. I didn't like his tone. I went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and practiced a smile that looked casual. I told myself he was just trying to guilt-trip me, make me feel small. That's what men do when they can't handle being challenged. I thought if I stayed confident, he'd get over it. That night, we barely spoke. The sound of the printer stayed in my head even after it stopped. I dreamed of green light sliding over faces, copying everything I wanted to forget. The next day at brunch, Miriam laughed about the dinner, saying I'd always been bold. Raoul said quietly that Tom looked pale when he left. I told them he was fine. My mother said, men like him never leave. They just sulk. I said exactly. When I got home later, Tom wasn't there. His shoes were by the door, but the notebook was gone from the drawer. On the counter sat a small note that said only, "Dinner was revealing." No anger, no threats, just that line. I told myself he was being dramatic again. I went to bed thinking he'd come around like always, but for the first time since I'd known him, I wasn't sure what he was thinking, and that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. After that dinner, the air in our apartment changed. It wasn't loud or tense, just hollow. Tom still did everything. Packed Leo's lunch, fixed the light in the bathroom, paid the bills. But he didn't try to talk. His silence used to feel lazy. Now it felt sharp, like he'd turned it into a weapon. I told myself he was sulking, waiting for me to apologize. I didn't plan to. At work, I tried to act normal. Nate walked in that Monday morning wearing a new navy shirt and smiled at me like nothing had happened. I liked that he didn't ask about Tom, didn't bring up the dinner. He said something about how people overreact to jokes. I said exactly, and it felt good to be agreed with. Kara, of course, wanted every detail. I told her Tom was being distant again. She said I should let him stew and live my life. So I did. That week, I started staying late again, pretending to review invoices. Nate stayed too. He said he needed to check water heaters in the lower building. Once, he leaned in close to show me something on his phone, a funny meme about co-workers. It wasn't romantic, just warm. When he left, I could still smell paint and soap on his shirt. Mr. Tenley, my boss, came by one afternoon and mentioned a reminder about security cameras. He said HR had updated the policy on after-hours work. He smiled politely, but watched me too long. I told him I understood, though I felt heat crawl up my neck. Later, I warned Nate that the cameras could see the loading bay. He said maybe we should be careful. I said there was nothing to hide, though I knew I sounded defensive. At home, Tom asked for access to our shared calendar so he could track school events and bills. I said he was being controlling. He said he wanted to simplify things. I rolled my eyes and said, "You mean you want to monitor me?" He didn't argue. He just nodded once and went to bed early. The next day, I saw him at the kitchen table again with papers spread out, bank statements, bills, receipts. He was highlighting something in yellow. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Just checking where the money goes." I said, "You think I'm stealing now?" He said, "No, I think I should understand better." That night, I texted Nate that Tom was acting weird. He said maybe Tom was jealous. I said he didn't have a reason to be. Nate replied, "People don't need reasons when they feel replaced." I didn't answer that. By the end of the week, I noticed Tom had opened a new bank envelope, his name only. When I asked, he said his school offered direct deposit options for separate accounts. I told myself it was petty. He'd never done anything bold before, so I ignored it. On Friday, Kara showed me a photo she'd posted from karaoke night. Me wearing Nate's baseball cap, laughing with my arm almost on his shoulder. I told her to delete it. She said it was cute. She didn't. I told her Tom would see it. She said, "So what? You're allowed to have fun." That evening, Tom printed the photo. I know because I saw the edge of it sticking out from his papers. When I asked where he got it, he said online. I said, "You're stalking me now?" He said, "It's public." I laughed and said he was ridiculous, but my stomach turned. The next morning, Leo asked why Dad had slept on the couch. I told him Daddy liked watching TV late. He said the TV was off all night. I said, maybe Daddy just wanted space. Leo nodded but looked sad. I told him families fight sometimes. He said, "But you didn't fight, you just stopped talking." I didn't have an answer for that. That afternoon, Miriam called to say she saw Kara's photo online and thought it was too flirty. She told me to be careful, since people gossip. I said she sounded like Denise. She said, "Well, Denise has reasons to watch you now." That made me hang up. When Tom came home from school, I told him his mother was turning people against me. He said no one needed to turn anyone, that people could see things for themselves. I said he was acting like a victim. He said he was acting like a father. I asked what that meant. He didn't explain. Later that night, after Leo fell asleep, I found a small stack of envelopes on the dining table. They were labeled utilities, rent, bank records, timeline. I laughed at first, thinking he was over-organizing again. But when I opened the top one, I saw copies of phone bills with my number highlighted, the nights I'd texted Nate. Another paper listed rideshare receipts to the same address as Nate's apartment. I felt my face go hot. I said, "You've been spying on me." Tom looked up from the couch and said, "You left the statements in the joint folder." I said he was twisting things. He said, "Then explain them." I said I didn't owe him an explanation, that I was tired of being treated like a child. He didn't push, he just said, "Noted." I slammed the door and went to the bedroom. I texted Kara that Tom was losing it. She said I should pack a bag for the weekend and stay at my parents'. I thought about it but decided not to. Leaving would make me look guilty. That Sunday, during breakfast, Tom made pancakes for Leo. He didn't make any for me. I said that was petty. He said he didn't know if I'd be home. I said I lived there. He said, "For now." It was the first time his voice had any weight to it. In the afternoon, Denise dropped by with groceries. She said Leo had forgotten his soccer cleats at her place. Tom thanked her. She gave me a polite smile but didn't come in. I could tell she knew. That night, Tom sat at the table again, sorting papers into folders. I asked what he planned to do with all of it. He said, "Keep records." I told him it was pathetic, that no one cared about his spreadsheets. He said quietly, "Someone will." When I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the click of the printer, even Leo's breathing, felt too loud. I checked Tom's side of the bed at dawn. Empty. He was already up, dressed, packing his work bag. I asked if he was avoiding me. He said, "Just preparing." After he left, I opened his drawer, looking for that notebook. It was still there, but not empty anymore. Inside the notes tab, he'd written 3 words: calm, clear, careful. Nothing else. I shut the drawer and sat there for a long time, staring at the words. They looked small, but they felt like the start of something I couldn't stop. By summer, the story of us had become public, not in the newspaper, but in whispers, at the playground, at the grocery store, even at church when Denise still went. I blamed Tom for that. He never spoke badly of me, but silence makes people curious. They filled in the blanks with whatever made sense, and somehow I still ended up the villain. It started with the neighborhood block party. Every year our street turned into a maze of tables and fairy lights. I wore a white sundress and told myself I would look like the calm one, the misunderstood wife who everyone secretly pitied. I invited Nate because I said we needed more maintenance crew representation. He hesitated but came anyway. Tom grilled burgers at the far end with Jonah, both of them acting polite. I could feel Denise's eyes on me from the lemonade table. Kara hovered near me, whispering that Nate was watching me more than I realized. I said it didn't matter. I wanted people to see us talk, to make Tom understand how replaceable he could be. When I laughed at something Nate said, I saw Tom glance up once, then go back to flipping burgers. That calmness made me furious. After sunset, music started. Nate asked if I wanted to dance. I said I didn't mind. It wasn't romantic, just 2 co-workers moving to a slow song under string lights. But people stared. I saw Miriam smiling proudly, like she thought I was proving something. When the song ended, Tom handed a plate of burgers to Jonah and walked home without a word. I told myself he was sulking again. The next weekend was the school fundraiser. I'd volunteered months ago, and Tom, being a teacher, had to be there too. I thought about skipping it but decided to go. I wanted to show everyone that nothing bothered me. I wore another bright dress. Tom stood at the ticket table with Denise. When I greeted him, he nodded, professional as ever. Some volunteer joked about how math teachers were bad at passion, but great at counting mistakes. I laughed too loudly. Tom didn't react. Kara came to my side and whispered that I was winning. I wasn't sure what the prize was anymore. Later, I overheard two parents talking. One said Tom was handling the split with grace. The other said she felt sorry for Leo. I froze. Split? We hadn't even said that word out loud. But it must have looked that way. Separate cars, polite distance, no smiles. Tom walked past me with a box of supplies and said, "Could you sign the form for Leo's booth?" His tone was dry, formal. I signed it, but my hand trembled. After the fundraiser, we all gathered for brunch at my parents' townhouse. Miriam had decorated the table with flowers and expensive pastries. She told everyone she was proud of me for staying strong. Raoul sat quietly, sipping his coffee, eyes tired. Denise and Jonah came too, invited out of courtesy. I thought we'd have a civil meal. Miriam started by saying Tom should learn to appreciate a woman like me. Denise didn't answer. Miriam said, "He's a good man, but good isn't enough." Denise finally looked up and said, "Sometimes good is all that keeps things steady." The room went quiet. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Let's not make this heavy." Then Kara, always the wrong person at the wrong time, brought up the dinner from months ago, the joke. She said people still couldn't believe I actually said that line. Miriam laughed again, saying I had courage. Raoul shifted uncomfortably. Tom didn't speak. He just set down his fork and looked straight at me. I felt my cheeks heat but refused to look away. Trying to fill the silence, I made a small speech about honesty, self-respect, not settling. I said sometimes marriages outgrow their usefulness and that people need to stop pretending perfect families exist. Miriam clapped. Raoul sighed. Denise looked at Tom, then at me, and said softly, "Honesty is easy when you've already burned the truth." I told her she was judging me. She said she was just observing. Tom told her to let it go, but I could see something shift in him, like he wasn't protecting me anymore, just managing the moment until it was done. The food went cold fast. I tried to start new topics, but the mood never recovered. When I poured myself more coffee, I saw the courier outside the gate, holding a large envelope. "Delivery for Mrs. Hale," he said. Everyone looked at me. I took it, half laughing, thinking it was a bank statement or something from work. Tom stood to open the gate for the man, and then sat back down, folding his napkin neatly. He said to Miriam, "Would you like me to wait outside?" She said, "No, stay." I tore the envelope open. Inside was a stack of papers clipped together. The first page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Temporary orders requested." For a second, I didn't process it. Then, the words blurred. My mother asked what it was. I said, "It's nothing." But Tom said, "It's something." He spoke calmly, almost kindly. He said he'd filed the petition the day before, that Jonah had helped him make sure everything was correct. He said there would be mediation for parenting and finances, that nothing had to get ugly. I couldn't even find words. Miriam gasped like she was watching a scandalous play. She said, "You're divorcing her over a joke?" Tom said, "I'm divorcing her over a pattern." Raoul asked if we could discuss this privately. Tom said there was nothing private left. Denise said quietly that Leo would be fine, as long as the adults stayed decent. That made me snap. I said, "You're all acting like I killed someone." Tom said, "You killed respect." The silence after that felt heavier than shouting. I stood up and said he couldn't just decide that on his own. He said, "That's what the court is for." Miriam started defending me again, saying I'd been under stress, that women are emotional creatures, that Tom should forgive and rebuild. He said he already tried, and rebuilding alone isn't possible. I turned to Kara for help, but she stared at her plate. Even she looked pale. Nate had texted earlier that he couldn't make brunch because he had a long shift. I realized no one wanted to be beside me right now. When Tom stood, he looked around the table one last time and said, "I'll send the schedule details by email." He walked out the door like it was just another errand. I sat down again because my legs felt weak. Miriam patted my hand, whispering that men always bluff, that he'd calm down once he realized how bad divorce looks on a teacher. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but my chest felt hollow. The courier's copy of the petition was still on the table, smudged where my fingers had shaken. The words, "temporary orders," stared at me like a quiet warning. I folded the paper, slid it into my purse, and told everyone I needed some air. Outside, the afternoon was bright and too still. I watched Tom get into his car, start the engine, and drive away without looking back. I told myself he was bluffing, that this was his way of teaching me a lesson, but deep down, I knew this time he wasn't bluffing at all. The next few weeks blurred together, filled with forms, phone calls, and the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. Tom didn't yell or gloat. He didn't even argue. He just moved with calm purpose, like a man following instructions in a manual he'd written himself. That calm scared me more than any shouting could have. He told me through a short email that everything would go through proper channels. I didn't reply. I wanted to fight, to make him react, but his silence gave me nothing to grab. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that once he saw how cold the world looked without me, he'd soften. Instead, the world turned cold for me. HR called me in one morning. Mr. Tenley sat with a printed complaint. Someone had reported inappropriate familiarity between me and a maintenance worker. I froze. He didn't name Nate, but I knew. I said the report was false, that people misunderstood friendly teamwork. He said there were camera records and a previous verbal warning about late hours. He told me to expect a written notice. When I texted Nate, he said maybe we should take a break from talking at work. I said he was overreacting. He said he had a girlfriend again, something about moving on. I asked if he was serious. He said yes, and that he didn't want to get dragged into any mess. That word, mess, stuck in my head like an insult. I told him he was a coward. He didn't reply. At home, Tom and I barely crossed paths. He started sleeping in Leo's room on weeknights. I told him it was ridiculous, that he was confusing the child. He said Leo slept better that way. He cooked simple dinners, washed the dishes, kept receipts neatly stacked. I'd find photocopies of them later in a new folder on his desk, labeled documentation. One Tuesday afternoon, I was called to the Community Law Center for mediation. The email said both parties had agreed to meet. I didn't agree, but apparently he had filed already, and attendance was mandatory. When I walked in, Tom sat across the table with a calm-looking woman, his attorney. Jonah sat behind them, taking notes. I had no one with me except nerves. The mediator, a thin man with glasses, spoke in a soft tone. He said we were here to discuss temporary parenting arrangements, finances, and communication boundaries. Tom handed over a folder, not a stack thrown together, but a perfect sequence of labeled evidence. Phone logs, rideshare receipts, a printout of that karaoke photo, and even a note from Leo's teacher about his recent withdrawal. I felt my throat dry. "You really gathered all this?" I asked. Tom said, "Yes, for clarity." The mediator asked me to share my side. I said Tom was punishing me for being honest, for wanting affection. He said I was rewriting events. I told the mediator that Tom was cold, unromantic, impossible to reach emotionally. Tom stayed quiet until the man asked if he wanted to respond. Then he said, "My wife doesn't lack affection, she lacks accountability." The mediator outlined the next steps. temporary custody schedules, financial separations. Tom requested joint legal custody, exchanges at school, and no overnight guests unrelated to family during Leo's time. I said that was controlling. The attorney said it was standard. Tom also asked to freeze our joint credit card and close the shared savings account until the court decided final terms. I called him petty. He said calmly, "It's protection, not punishment." Halfway through, the mediator took a short break. I went outside for air and called my mother. Miriam said the whole thing was overblown and that I should stall as long as possible. She said Tom was too decent to push hard and that he'd cave once he realized the cost. I wanted to believe her. When I went back in, Jonah handed me copies of the evidence folder. Inside, I saw highlighted text between me and Nate. Not the words themselves, just timestamps, enough to show patterns. He'd gone through months of bills to mark every night I stayed late. I felt exposed, like someone had turned my private excuses into a timeline of lies. The mediator asked if we could agree to keep things civil for Leo's sake. Tom nodded. I forced myself to nod too. He said he wanted only structure and respect. I said I wanted fairness. He said fairness starts with honesty. By the end of the session, a draft order was prepared. It listed temporary custody, equal visitation, separate finances, and a rule about communication only through a parenting app. I signed it with shaking hands. Tom signed neatly and thanked the mediator. I hated how polite he was, how he looked like the reasonable one. After the meeting, Denise was waiting outside with Leo. She smiled at Tom, then at me, cautious but polite. Tom's attorney thanked her for bringing the child, and Denise said it was no trouble. She turned to me and asked if I remembered Leo's dentist appointment tomorrow. I lied and said yes. She gave me a sad look, like she already knew I didn't. Later that evening, I sat in the car outside a coffee shop staring at my reflection in the dark window. My phone buzzed, an email from HR confirming a disciplinary meeting for next week. I thought about deleting it, pretending it didn't exist. Instead, I opened Tom's message in the parenting app. It was short. "Please confirm you received the draft order. Pick up Friday after school." I typed, "Fine," then deleted it, then typed again. "Received." Nothing else. He didn't reply. That night, I tried calling Nate again. Straight to voicemail. I called Kara, but she didn't pick up either. I scrolled through old messages, trying to find proof that someone still saw my side. Everything I read made me sound shallow, defensive, mean. I told myself people just didn't understand context. When I finally came home, Tom was sitting on the couch reading. Leo was asleep in his room. Tom looked up and asked if I'd eaten. I said yes, even though I hadn't. I asked if he was happy now that he'd made everything official. He said, "This isn't about happiness. It's about peace." I laughed bitterly. "You think paperwork gives you peace?" I asked. He said, "It gives me boundaries." Then he stood, turned off the lamp and went to his room. I stayed there in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the sound of Leo's soft snore through the hallway. For the first time, I realized Tom had built something stronger than love, a wall of calm that I couldn't climb. The next morning, I woke up to find the apartment tidier than usual. His folders were gone, his laptop missing. On the counter sat a single page from the mediator's packet, underlined in blue ink. Both parties agreed to maintain respectful communication in the presence of the child. It wasn't a threat or a note of anger. It was just a rule. But reading it made me feel smaller than I'd ever felt. I folded it carefully and put it back down, pretending it meant nothing, even though I knew it was already everything. The hearing came faster than I thought it would. 1 minute, I was still telling my mother this was temporary, and the next, I was sitting in a cold courtroom, hands shaking on my lap. Tom was across the aisle, calm in a navy suit. Jonah sat behind him with a quiet smile that wasn't smug, just steady. Denise held Leo's jacket, folding it over her arm like she was protecting something sacred. My lawyer, a woman I'd hired last minute, whispered that these were just temporary orders. She said to stay polite, show emotion, but not too much. I nodded, though I barely heard her. The judge read through the file in silence. Every page looked too familiar. My text records, the rideshare receipts, the HR letter about workplace boundaries. The judge said Tom's documentation was thorough. She asked if I disputed it. I said yes, but my reasons came out thin. Misunderstandings, timing, loneliness. Even as I spoke, I heard how weak it sounded. Tom didn't look at me when he spoke. He said he wanted stability for Leo, structure and respect for both households. His tone wasn't angry. It was final. The judge nodded and began listing her decisions. Joint legal custody, exchanges at school only, no unrelated overnights when Leo was present, separate finances, a freeze on the joint card, co-parenting classes for both of us. My lawyer squeezed my hand. I felt like I was watching someone else's life being sorted into folders. When it was my turn to speak again, I said Tom was cold, that he'd been shutting me out long before any of this. The judge asked if he'd ever been violent or neglectful. I said no. She asked if I'd ever tried counseling. I said he didn't believe in it. Tom said quietly, I asked twice. The judge wrote something down and moved on. Afterward, outside the courtroom, Denise thanked the attorney and helped Leo put on his jacket. Tom crouched to tie his son's shoe, then stood and told me the exchange times were in the file. I asked if we could talk privately. He said, we'll use the app. I told him he didn't have to act like a stranger. He said, I'm acting like someone learning new rules. He turned to walk away. I said he was heartless. He stopped for a second, then said, no, just finished. I wanted to shout, to pull him back into some kind of fight, but Jonah stepped between us, calm as ever, and guided him toward the exit. Denise followed, holding Leo's hand. The little boy waved once and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then they were gone. That afternoon, I had my HR meeting. The manager handed me a written warning, fraternization policy violation, reassignment to a new property, loss of scheduled privileges. I nodded, pretending not to care. When I walked out, people avoided my eyes. Kara barely said hello. I went home to an apartment that felt too clean. Half the drawers were empty. His guitar was gone, his hoodie, his toothbrush. Only the notebook remained in the kitchen drawer. I opened it, half expecting blank pages. There was just one line written neatly under the last tab. Dignity is quiet. For a long time I stared at those words. I wanted to hate him for them, but all I felt was the dull ache of knowing he'd meant them months ago. At dusk, the doorbell rang. A courier again. Just one last envelope. Stamped, sealed, official. I signed without reading, placed it on the counter, and listened to the sound of his car pulling away in my mind. I thought I'd won by being louder, bolder, freer. But in the end, he didn't need volume. He had proof. And silence. The apartment hummed softly. I poured myself a glass of water, stared at my reflection in the window, and told myself he'd miss me someday. But the echo that answered back was only the sound of my own voice fading. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.